I'm going to give you a bit of psychoanalytic history here that is being and has been actively repressed. Jacques-Alain Miller inherited the keys to Lacan's kingdom because he had married Lacan's daughter, Judith. But he moved farther and farther away from the primary preoccupations, and I think the proper preoccupations of psychoanalysis, work and sex. And he emphasized the more abstract and philosophical aspects of Lacan's thinking and teaching because he didn't have an experience in the clinic that Lacan had for all of his, crazy esoteric writings, and that I think Pomeier really had. The philosophical bearings of Hegel, combined with critical application of Lacan's theories, have made a certain approach to psychoanalysis more compatible with a very commodified notion of French theory that exists in academia, at least since the 80s. Zizek is a great Lacanian pundit, whose best contributions to the discourse may be his anti-liberal hot takes and his impiety with regard to professional manager class liberal ideology. In Paris, however, there were deep, intensive struggles over the meaning and import of psychoanalytic teaching and theory, and various schools and many people had serious fallings out with Jacques-Alain Miller. Pomeier said he remained loyal to Lacan, just as Lacan said he remained loyal to Freud, but he rejected Miller's version of Lacanianism. Pomeier was a great clinician, but his reputation didn't leave Paris very much because Miller actively blocked any dissenters from being translated into English. Spanish was more friendly to other schools of Lacanianism, but the Lacan we know today in America is Miller's Lacan. One thing that I did before I went to analysis with Pomeier was that I translated one of his books, thinking I need to rectify this, lacunae in Lacanian history and practice. That was also my crazy fantasy. Like, if I just do something right, everything will be okay. That doesn't happen. But he wrote a book called Du bon usage de la colère érotique, which I translated as Erotic Anger, a User's Manual. It's still in print. It's at University of Minnesota Press. In our present age, Pomeier's text would be canceled upon arrival. But it is ever more useful and ever more important to people who are suffering from the popular addictions of the moment: anxiety, depression, erectile dysfunction, loneliness, etc. He offered a theory about the proper use of anger in love and work that remained absolutely true to the theory of libido and intersubjectivity and intrasubjectivity that is so critical to the Freudian enterprise and the clinic to which it gave rise. I'm going to give you a very, very short summary. It's a really beautiful little book, and I recommend it to everyone, especially since I know Jennifer's working on pleasure. He says that, our narcissism, our secondary narcissism, doesn't accept sexuality because sexual desire is a break in the narcissistic self-sufficiency. And I feel like the primary narcissism is that healthy narcissism of the baby, which imagines itself to be self-sufficient in a cycle with the mother. But we're all trapped in a secondary narcissism where nobody wants to have genital stimulation because it's just too disturbing, because screens are too reassuring. So, but Pomeier says sometimes, unless your lover ghosts you, which is like really horrible, and then you have to be like all anxious, but what you get is not really like pleasure when she or he texts you in the end. It's just like, oh, phew, I'm not rejected for the moment. But what Pomeier tried to talk about was this like inability for us to realize genital pleasure. And he said anger is really an important element of breaking through the membrane, the egg-like membrane in which we live as regressed narcissistic beings. And he has beautiful examples from his clinical practice. Of course, like this goes so against what we think of as Tinder, Grindr sex, right? It's all about compatibility. Oh, do you like this? Do you like this? Yes, I like this. Okay, let's do it. It's like the most unsexy thing in the world. But So I really think everyone should read this book, but anyway. But, he's been eclipsed by the Millerians. So the libido draws its energy from aggression. Our narcissism hates to be torn apart by lack and desire. To break through the shell of secondary narcissism, we need to draw upon the dark side of the libidinal drives in order to realize our passionate, not algorithmically groomed relationship to the other. So I did something unpopular with the Millerians and the Lacanians. I realized that Todd McGowan talked to you about similar issues. So it's funny that we really agree on this, and that Theory Underground found us both. But which I think is part of the politics of anti-theory speak that I was supposed to talk about today. In Erotic Anger, a User's Manual, I translated jouissance as pleasure or enjoyment. And I translated jouir, the verb, as to come or to enjoy. Just very, very like vulgar physical things, rather than keeping the term in its French form. Enjoyment actually in English comes from the French word jouir as well, because in 1066, William II, the Norman, conquered the island of the Anglo-Saxon island and brought in all these words. Am I being too pedantic here? Can I just... which is why we have one word for pig, but another word for pork. Because pig is the Anglo-Saxon word, and porc is the French word, like what you eat at table. There are a lot of things like that. So I decided to translate. I hope that people would begin to understand Lacan's theory of pleasure and enjoyment as condensed through Pomeier's clinical experience, and to understand enjoyment as something powerful, dark, death-dealing, and life-giving at the same time. I wasn't optimistic that a new school of Lacanian theory would grow out of my decision. I'm so glad that Todd agreed with me about his translation too. But I hope to also impart to all of you this sense of Lacan's own creative force in his psychoanalytic practice. And he attributed his own creativity, his theories of enjoyment that he brought into psychoanalysis, very explicitly to his break with the Freud family legacy, because he thought that Freud had made a really bad mistake by passing on psychoanalysis to his daughter, Anna Freud, who was an ego psychologist and also a pediatric psychoanalyst, a child psychoanalyst, who is really a mediocre thinker compared with Melanie Klein or D.W. Winnicott, but because she bore the name Anna Freud, her brand of ego psychology, which I would say, gives birth to CBT, became a dominant strain within psychoanalytic theory. It was all the more ironic for Pomeier then, and other powerful French psychoanalysts like Françoise Dolto, who we also don't know about because her work has not been translated into English because she broke with the Millerians, that it was Lacan's own theory in school that was passed on and deadened, not through a daughter, but through a son-in-law, trained primarily as a philosopher, who had everything to gain from monopolizing the Lacanian legacy, especially in the English-speaking world, and which had little understanding of the fights that were happening in Paris. So it's hard to take in all this history. A certain level-headedness is necessary, and Pomeier was not a cool head. He was an angry, angry man. He broke with Miller's school in a very dramatic way. There were two schools. One was called the École de la Cause Freudienne. He started his own school. It's too complicated to go into now. But much of the history is available to anyone who wants to read it in Elizabeth Rudinesco's Histories of Psychoanalysis.